And so I'd like to welcome you all again to kick things off tonight. I'm going to introduce Chris Osgood, the director of our City of Boston Office of Climate Resilience. Chris, take it away.
Kate, thank you so much. And thank you so much for your leadership on this project. As Kate said, I'm Chris Osgood. I have the great pleasure of leading our city's Office of Climate Resilience and serving as a senior advisor to the mayor. And on behalf of the mayor and on behalf of our Chief Climate Officer, Brian Sweat, I want to thank all of you, not just for being here tonight, but for all that you do to support our city and our neighborhoods and make Boston a wonderful place we can all call home. The focus tonight is really on making sure that we can move forward with all of you on a set of long-term projects that protect you, your homes, and your neighborhood from the coastal flood risk that is in front of us. The context for this is Climate Ready Boston, an effort that many of you were directly engaged in and helped shape. This included the publication of the Coastal Resilience Solutions for Dorchester Plan in 2020, the reconstruction and redesign of McConnell Park, and a whole set of ongoing planning work stretching from Tinian Beach to Moakley. And as we do some of this work, which is focused on some of the nearer term coastal flood risk in front of us, we're also working on long-term efforts. And a key partner for us in that is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They bring a tremendous amount of expertise and experience and capacity to be able to address long-term flood risk and are one really critical partner in the work ahead of us. Engaging the Army Corps happens through something called a Coastal Storm Risk Management Study. That is the study that we are engaged in right now. For Boston, it is a 6-year-long study, and over the previous 3 years, the Corps has been looking at the risk to Boston that sea level rise and storm surge causes. And over the next 3 years, the Corps is going to be looking to identify a suite of projects that can address that risk, that are feasible to build, and that work for all of you, that work for the community. And it's that set of projects, that suite of projects that we identify together, that then gets submitted to Congress in the spring of 2028. And it's that report to Congress that helps unlock and allow for federal funding to move those projects forward in design with all of you and into construction in the 2030s and in the future decades. Now, because this is a long process, there is complementary work which the city is doing in the near term. But while this is a long process, that effort to really build that suite of projects really starts this summer. And we want to make sure that tonight we're having a conversation with all of you to connect you to this process, to help answer your questions about the process, and to make sure that we're beginning to look at some of those areas that the Corps has identified for geographic focus. This is not, as Kate mentioned, and we'll mention again throughout the presentation, the only opportunity to engage in this project. There are lots of opportunities both over the course of this week, this summer, and beyond to help influence and shape the way in which this work will happen. So we look forward to engaging with you in this longer term set of conversations and really appreciate your engagement here tonight and throughout this work always. Before turning it back over to Kate and then over to Jeff Herzog, I just want to give a moment to see if there's any elected officials or their representatives who would like to offer any opening remarks or to put their information in the chat. And similarly, if there's any members of the press who have an interest in putting their information in the chat, I encourage you to do so as well. Not seeing any hands or folks coming off mute. I'll turn it back over to Kate. Look forward to the presentation. Looking forward to your questions in the ongoing conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. So just to reintroduce myself, I am Kate Rosa. I am a senior climate resilience project manager with the City of Boston Office of Climate Resilience, and I have the privilege of being able to manage the study program on behalf of the city. So my goal here tonight is building off what Chris just said to kind of put a little bit more background into introducing us as the teams to you, background from our Climate Ready Boston work in Dorchester, and then really to give you all a report out on the progress of this study, the privilege that we have at this time to be able to have some really productive early draft conversations with our federal partners, and to kick off the conversation with you all, both to hear your feedback and your questions, and also to hear more about how we can be a partner to you in learning about this work. So with that, just to give you a little bit of background on where this effort has started, the City of Boston has been working through its Climate Ready Boston work since the last decade, essentially. Starting in around 2014, 2015, the city of Boston pulled together an all hazards approach, including weather and other societal and public health concerns relating to climate change impacts and how they would affect us here in the city of Boston. These the different models and the different reports pulled together some pretty stark findings, but we're able to pull together some data that we could use to help inform what our neighborhood and localized impacts would be. And the highest areas of risk that the Climate Ready Boston study found in 2016 were those effects of climate change associated with rising temperatures, more frequent and intense rainstorms, sea level rise, and the increase in frequency and intensity of the larger coastal storm events. So all of these risks together gave us data to inform how we could look at our coastline as a potential area of concern both now and in the future. So as part of the kickoff into our coastline, our 47 miles of coastline resilience planning, we took a step back in 2018 to look at what our resilient waterfront vision could look like. And what we're building towards as a city is not only protecting from these coastal flooding effects, but how can we also infuse environmentally equitable and just solutions and placemaking into our waterfront spaces that we already have and investing in our new waterfront spaces for the future to be part of the fabric of our city's identity, which is a coastal city. And so using this as our vision roadmap, starting in 2017, we actually did go into each individual neighborhood that's along our coastline to come up with our Climate Ready Boston neighborhood plans. So for Dorchester, the update was finished in 2020, and the reports are absolutely available, and I recommend that you take a flip through them online. The link is in the chat to just refresh yourself on kind of where that study effort left off. But essentially, these plans were the culmination of a community engagement effort with many of you that are joining us here tonight and many of our community partners. So if I don't say it enough, thank you for joining us and for continuing to show up as we do this really important work for our coastline now and for our future. And so the goal in where all of these plans sort of felt their common thread was the areas in the map on the left where the city of Boston has been historically using landfill to create land since very early days of the city being founded and people living in the region has resulted in our dense urban waterfront where we've been filling in land, and those are the areas that are the most susceptible to the impacts, the future impacts of climate change, as well as where we see present fringe flooding and coastal event flooding. So before we dive into tonight's Army Corps 101 and our process overview, I want to just center folks in this reality that if it feels like a circle, it a little bit is. The analogy that I like to use is that the design process can feel like we're continually going in circles at times. But if we step back and look at it from a staircase perspective, I promise you we are going up in our circles. So if the design circle process is to add new information, make those changes, and then share it with people, our goal in this process is to move to the next phase of our work. So where our Climate Ready Boston plans, where our conceptual plans, we're moving towards a preliminary design um, goal with our Army Corps partners. So as a reminder, these are just some photo representations of the flooding effects that we feel today in Boston. And to give you a scale, just a reminder of of what we are already seeing happening today. Um, we know that coastal flooding is real, it is evidence-based, it is science-based. That is telling us we are seeing the effects of sea level rise and increased precipitation and storms. So when we look at turning our Climate Ready Boston plans into action, we're looking at three concurrent strategies. These are all happening at the same time. Today's storms, we're looking at our near-term response actions, working with our Office of Emergency Management and other partners to work on our response to events and how we can mobilize during storm events. The decade storms, this middle box is looking at our 2030 pathways, which we're calling our short-term flood pathways. And these are projects that we have ongoing, looking at those near-term priorities where flooding is happening today, and we know it's happening more frequently or has been happening more frequently, even in the last 10 years. And some of these projects that we have underway across Dorchester include our Moakley Park and Moakley Connectors projects. We have a few future projects that I identified on here, but this work has been ongoing, including the Morrissey Boulevard work with MassDOT and DCR, as well as some private expansion that might be happening along our coastline, um, both points north of Harbor Point and also along Harbor Walk areas. We also have projects that we completed in Dorchester, like McConnell Park, which was completed in 2022. We have a couple more ongoing projects, the Beads Bridge project, which is in Morrissey Boulevard, but not quite connected, another multi-agency project that we are aware of and coordinating with, and then Tinian Beach, our DCR project along the waterfront. So the core program, the part of what the Army Corps will talk about is what's beyond 2030. We're really looking at beyond our near-term solutions, what can we do together for the long term? And for our Climate Ready Boston vision, which is a large amount of projects, when you look at our 47 miles of coastline, what can we get help with implementing from our federal partners? So why now and why Army Corps? The Army Corps has a specific charge to protect the federal interest, which is very closely aligned with our Climate Ready Boston key principles for what we are looking to protect, with a few exceptions around how we define things. So you'll hear us talk a lot about defining terms tonight, and it's just really helpful to try to give you that baseline mindset on how to give you that baseline of where Army Corps might talk about things, where we have talked about similar items in Climate Ready Boston. And so the federal interest is really focusing on protecting for reducing risk to homes, critical infrastructure, evacuation corridors, and effects to natural resources and the environment. So something else that Jeff will dig into as well is the Army Corps has a very specific process that they are following. And a part of that is that they're designing to their own specifications. They have their own design procedures when it comes to how they start to finish, follow their own process, and are able to use these different tools that we will talk about later today. But ultimately, by completing this CSRM study process, we have the opportunity to unlock up to 65% of federal funding to implement projects that we're able to come up with together with the core team. So just to give you a little bit of a milestone check-in here, what we've done before and what we have presentations on our website are a couple of just informational presentations around how the Army Corps has been getting up to speed with Climate Ready Boston and performing some of the baseline analysis for flood mapping or the risk of inaction alternatives. What we're going to focus on today is the locations of where we're looking for implementing tools in Dorchester and giving you an overview of kind of what are the tools in the Army Corps' toolkit. And as Chris mentioned earlier at the beginning of this presentation, our ultimate goal is to be on track to complete our reporting in 2027 so that we can get it to Congress for appropriation to design and construct by 2028, which means the next year is critical for our process. More specifically, the next 6 months, which is where we have the opportunity to really shape and provide feedback on some of these high-level locations and tools that we can talk about together. So with that, I am going to take a brief pause here to see if we have any concerns in the chat, questions in the chat, anything that we need. All right. With that, I have the great privilege to introduce Jeff Herzog, our Army Corps project manager and planner. And Jeff, you want to take it away?
Sure. Can I just get a sound check and make sure that my computer didn't bug me over the last 20 minutes?
You are all set, loud and clear.
Awesome. Hey, good evening, everybody. As Kate mentioned, my name is Jeff Herzog. I'm with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, New England District. Our home office is in Concord, Massachusetts, but I'm currently calling from Boston. And so I would look forward to anyone who's going to be at the mayor's coffee hour tomorrow in mid Dorchester. Look for me. I'll be in a purple button down shirt, and I'm happy to be pulled aside and chat for a little bit between meetings. But in the meantime, on behalf of Colonel Justin Pappas, the commander of the New England District, and all of our leadership throughout the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, North Atlantic Division, and New England District, thank you for taking this time tonight to come. There are so many things that you could be doing. It's 2 days before a holiday. It's the start of the summer season. Luckily for me, it's raining tonight, and so I don't have a lot of people running around and doing errands. Instead, you're here doing your civic duty and participating in this very vital meeting and discussion for the community of Dorchester. So thank you on behalf of our leadership and my team. And so what I want to do is really start this conversation with a little bit of information that I'm going to share with you about process and about risk and about tools in the toolkit, as Kate mentioned earlier, and about how can you participate in this process. And then where I want to land tonight is a common understanding that this is not the only time that you will have an opportunity to share comments, questions, or input. This is the start of the conversation. And we need you to be active over the next year as we get ready for the NEPA document and the draft release of the report, but also over the next couple of years as we try and get this ready for Congress in order to recommend a project for Congress to authorize and appropriate for us to implement in partnership with the city of Boston and the state of Massachusetts. So there's lots of things that I want you to take away tonight, but if there's only one thing that you take away from this is that we need you to be a part of this conversation. If we wait until we have a plan appropriated and authorized by Congress to get your input, it's too late. And at that point, it means further delays in getting projects and measures implemented necessary to manage the risk that the city of Boston and the state of Massachusetts and the economy is at risk of. So thank you. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide and kind of talk about some of these, how do we get to a common place and understanding? So the city of Boston, with Climate Ready Boston as our foundation, we used Climate Ready Boston as the jumping off point. However, we have to all recognize and understand that Climate Ready Boston was more than just coastal storm risk. It was about transportation resilience. It was about community resilience. It was about water quality, stormwater. There were lots of resilience pieces of the puzzle that Climate Ready Boston focused on. Our authorization from Congress is to focus on the coastal storm risk aspect of the Climate Ready Boston initiative. And so that's the first place we need to have a common understanding is that resilience in the city of Boston along the 47 miles of coastline is a puzzle. The Corps of Engineers, in partnership with the City of Boston, will bring one piece of that puzzle to the table. However, we can't operate unilaterally, and we can't just assume and act upon the Corps of Engineers to solve all of the problems here. We are limited. We are focused on coastal storm risks. What does that mean? That means the both tropical and extratropical impacts with storm surge. It means wave action and erosion. It means sea level change associated changes. So, prime example, I was walking along downtown North End today, walking along the harbor's edge, thinking about, you know, in today's climate, in today's water, we have maximum water surface elevation on record is 15.44 feet from Grayson and Riley, right? But if we add 46 inches of sea level change over the next 100 years to that high tide, think about that change and the impacts of that coming over. And so we need to identify where are those flood pathways. So that's kind of just a common place where we need to start the conversation tonight. Now, throughout this discussion, please feel free to put comments, questions in the chat, or we will pause and have opportunities if you'd like to come off of mute and make comments or ask questions. But understand that we are working with the City of Boston to look at those long-term and some medium-term changes. Now, when I say long-term, I'm looking out 50 to 100 years. However, the discussion is not going to stop at 50 to 100 years. This audience, this discussion will then continue on beyond that. And so we'll have a little bit of conversation about surge barriers and about, well, if this is the near-term solution, the medium-term solution, what is the long-term solution? And then what is the solution even beyond that? Because the reality is we have, as a nation and as a people, adapted over time. We can't stop now. The conversation has to continue. Let's go to the next slide. So if we're talking about coastal storm risk, we have to understand, well, what does that risk look like visually so that we can understand it's not just hyperbole and we're not just talking intangibles here. There is science and engineering that supports this. And so what you'll see here on the screen is you'll see, if you're familiar with the Woods Hole Group Consulting, they have done the Boston Harbor flood risk model, and then they did the MCFRM, Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model. What you see is Kate, we're seeing this. There we go. Thanks. The Corps of Engineers, we have to use our own models because our models are life cycle models. What does that mean? It means we don't just look at one particular event over one frequency over one time period. We have to look cyclically because over time, there's an assumption that the economic damages are going to change, escalate or de-escalate. That structures are going to be damaged and removed from the floodplain, or structures are going to have infill development into the floodplain. And so we need to calculate all that. In order to do that, we have to use our own model. But what we wanted to make sure is that the City of Boston, the state of Massachusetts, and the New England region, while they continue to use MCFRM, and then we use our coastal hazard system model, they use the same foundational AdCirc model, but the floodplains look very similar. So we know with a great level of confidence that whatever plans we recommend will be able to tie in with the City of Boston's plans. Because what we don't want, and if we can go to the next slide to see the southern part in the Neponset. What we don't want is we don't want the City of Boston, the state of Massachusetts, and private stakeholders to invest in resilience projects for us to have to come in 5 years and tear them out and build something different because it's not part of our program. It's not part of that doesn't help anybody, and it's not a great use of assets. So what we've done is we've incorporated the same level of mesh and detail, and we've evaluated the two models to ensure that whatever the City of Boston and stakeholders using the MCFRM implement will be able to tie into our projects. Because the idea isn't that the city does short term, we do long term, so we're going to come in and build on top of or tear up the city's projects. No, We're going to integrate them into a comprehensive system. The intent here is a watershed level system that manages flood risk. I keep talking about managing flood risk. Let's go to the next slide. What do I mean when I talk about managing flood risk? I mean that we have to manage those risks in order to protect evacuation corridors, public transportation. There's lots of areas throughout Boston that over 50% of the census tracts depend on public transportation. We have to protect those critical infrastructures, homes, schools, government offices, emergency management services. We have to protect housing and homes. We have to protect clearly the critical transportation, but we also have to, it's our duty and obligation to protect natural resources. I'm a big fan of Aldo Leopold, if anyone's familiar with his work in the 1940s, 1950s. And what he came to realize is if you don't consider natural resources in your planning, then what you end up doing is you create habitat for invasive species, introduced species that create then adverse impacts on your built and your human population. And so if we factor in natural resources into our planning process, we can create comprehensive biophysical and developed community solutions to coastal storm risk. And so that's definitely still part of our charge. Next slide. When we think about risk, let's not just think about hazards. Let's think about the result of the hazard, i.e. risk equals, if you're a math person, I'm a visual person, which is why I love Kate's slide here. Risk equals the probability of a hazard occurring times the consequence of that hazard occurring. So if you think about it, if something has a low probability but a high impact, you can follow that to the right and to the left and see that it's probably a 2. But if something has a high probability and a high impact, that could be a 4. And so as we look at risk, we have to look at how can we reduce risk? Well, in order to reduce risk, you either have to reduce the probability of the risk occurring, or you have to reduce the consequence of that risk. And when we talk about that, that's when we kind of talk about what tools can we use. Next slide. So we have some tools here, and Kate's drawn a toolbox here. So the first drawer and the top drawer, you can protect. If I build a wall, that wall is going to stop the water from coming in. If I build a barrier, that stops the barrier from coming in. So when we consider stopping the water from coming in, that reduces the probability of a storm from impacting the community, and therefore we are managing that risk. So we call those kind of in that structural bucket of tools. There's another bucket there. It's called non-structural. So when we think about non-structural, let's think about historically. We were nomadic communities, Native American communities, and even as we were beginning to first settle, we didn't know where the water was going to come, so we built. We wanted to be close to the salt water. For transportation, we wanted to be close to the fresh water for irrigation and for sustenance. And so we built there. The flood came, we realized it's probably not a good place to build. Let's move to someplace else. That was a form of adaptation and accommodation. Today, in a built environment, we're not going to pick up the city of Boston. We're not going to pick up downtown in the financial district and move it. However, there are ways for us to reduce the consequence of the water from coming in. We may not be able to stop the water from coming in effectively, but if we can reduce the consequence, then we are still reducing the risk. And so that's where we come up with those types of non-structural solutions. And that is through some forms of building elevation. Maybe it's through wet floodproofing, allowing that first floor to be sacrificial, or allowing that first floor to be parking. There are examples of that already in Boston with World Trade Center and with Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital in Charlestown. And maybe there's some examples in Dorchester that we're not even familiar with, and we'd love to find out what folks are already doing. So keep that in mind. And then there's also that third drawer. That third drawer is someplace where I give the credit to the city of Boston and even to the leadership in the state, in that sometimes you have to manage it through zoning, permitting, planning, legislation, ordinances, where you have to implement policies and procedures and regulations that say, we know this is going to what it's going to look like in the future. And so we have to make decisions today to manage the risk in the future. So that's another one of those where it's maybe non-structural and non-physical, but it is a tool in the toolkit. We'll talk a lot more of these as we're going through, because one tool doesn't fit every scenario. It doesn't even fit every scenario within the community of Dorchester. So it's important to understand what all these tools are. And if you're going to understand the tools, next slide, please, you have to understand what the hazard is that's impacting your community. So in Dorchester, you are built in many areas right up to the harbors, or to the developed edge. So you move straight from developed community into the water. In other areas, you have slivers of beach. Tinian Park or Tinian Beach is an example of, you have just a little bit of beach, right? And then you have other areas where you have a riverine condition right there in Dorchester along the Neponset, where there may be opportunities to take softer, adaptable approaches, right? And so it's understanding, what is the hazard facing? Is it wave attack and erosion? Not really. The biggest threat and hazard facing Dorchester is the wall of water that comes in, and that it's that wall of water, that storm surge, that's tied to an 11 to 12 foot, 10 to 12 foot tide range. From low tide to high tide. That makes you different than Stratford. That makes you different than New York. That makes you different than Honolulu, Hawaii. These other places where they're trying to implement resilience projects. When you have such a significant tide range, you have to consider that in developing what your solutions are that would work. And so we look at what provides, what is the hazard? If this is the hazard for Dorchester, what are the tools that we can implement to provide the maximum protection? Well, if these are the tools that provide the maximum protection, then we have to look at, well, what's actually constructible? And then if we identify what's actually constructible, we take that down to another level. That's why it kind of looks like this funnel going down, because we go with the pie in the sky. And then we go to, okay, this is what we know will work. And then we go to, this is what we know we can construct. Then the next question is what should we construct based off of economic return on investment, based off of socioeconomic return on investment, but based off of cultural and historic impacts and benefits, and also based off of those natural, that biodiversity and non-physical, biophysical community. What's best for Dorchester? And so as we get to that, we filter this out. That's where this meeting tonight comes into place. I'm not going to show you a bunch of renderings and say, this is what we're recommending for Dorchester. I want to show you where we see the hazards. Many of you are already familiar with that. I want to show you the alignments that we've identified that can provide that maximum protection. I want to show you what the tools in the toolkit are based off of those alignments. But then I need to know from you, what is the impact? This system will be active 5 to 10 days out of the year over the next 20 years. And then over the next 50 to 100 years, you're going to see it active more frequently because of sea level change and climate change. It's happening. Science and engineering is telling us it's happening. It's a reality. It's tomorrow's reality, but we have to start planning for it today. So if we want this system to become a part of the community's identity and to become a part of the community's viewscape and characteristic for the next 100 years, we need to make very clear and very sure and very deliberate steps to involve the community in the planning process today. So that's where, what is the best fit for Dorchester? We might not all agree with what the right solution is. We might not all like the right solution, but we have to understand that when you put 20 people in a room, you're going to get 15 different approaches to solving a problem. What is the best approach for Dorchester as a whole? Next slide. All right. Before I get into the actual what are the tools in the toolkits that we're looking at, I'd like to pause here and offer an opportunity for anyone who has kind of questions on the risk discussion or kind of the hazards and the approach that we're taking with the Dorchester community. So I'll pause for a 10-second uncomfortable pause. It's uncomfortable for me. It's probably very comfortable for you because you get a break from listening to me.
If you do have a question, I will recognize call on going to the React button and you can raise your hand or I will keep an eye on the chat.
So I see Philip Boxel in the chat. He said, I talk about return on investment versus public health and welfare. So that's a very good point. And we have to understand that public health and welfare is part of that return on investment. So when we consider return on investment, yes, there is I'm going to invest $1 to stop the water from coming in, and therefore in the future, I'm going to reduce maintenance costs by this much. I'm going to reduce federal emergency response by this much. I'm going to reduce inundation damages to the community by this much. That is a tangible monetary return on investment that we can declare and everyone shake hands and agree on. But to your point, public health and welfare, those socioeconomic, there's how many people in Dorchester and throughout the city of Boston that depend on public transportation to get to work. If I can't get to work for 3 days, that's a month's worth of rent. That is public health and welfare. If I can't access healthcare, then we've seen this across the nation already, where when you don't have access to welfare, when you lose power for 3 to 4 days, whether it's in the middle of February or whether it's in the middle of August, those temperature extremes. So protecting the infrastructure, you see a tangible return on investment. It may not look like a pure dollar for dollar. However, we do absolutely consider public health and welfare as part of that return on investment equation. And we have tools and we're working on metrics for trade-off analyses in order to ensure that we select the plan that maximizes total net benefits, not just a dollar for dollar economic return on investment. Yeah, so the question came up about for the project. And so the answer is no. However, we have to understand that a project of this size, what I told a group this morning, we could have easily made this a 15-year study for $25 million because of the complexities and because of the just sheer diversity of geography, community, and distance in the watershed. However, we've been able to latch on and use Climate Ready Boston as a foundation, and we continue to work very closely with the city of Boston, as well as the quasi-government agencies, Boston Water Sewer Commission, as well as the state level agencies, Massport, MBTA. So because of those relationships, we've been able to find some efficiency. So right now we are a 6-year and $6 million study. However, that's not the question you want to know. You want to know the question of when we get it all designed, how much is it going to cost? Is it going to cost 300 million? Is it going to cost 1.1 billion? Is it going to cost 12 billion? Or is it going to cost 56 billion? And the reality is we don't know how much it's going to cost until we get it fully designed, understand our environmental mitigation, and then understand our real estate impacts and understand where all of our compensation and what our design and construction complexities are. I will tell you that as part of our charge to this is we have to identify and prioritize the phasing, understanding, just like the city did. They've identified, hey, we need to address the near-term 2030 flood pathways. So then as we look to implement our project, we will have to implement based off of where are the next level of flood pathways that we have to construct for. And then based off of that, we have to identify well, if this is the next level of flood pathways, what happens if I build this piece without this piece? So there is a specific sequencing and phasing piece that has to come, understanding that this is likely, and this is not, intended to scare anybody, but this is likely going to be several hundreds of millions of dollars, or probably in the billions. And that's just because of the sheer size of the project area and the level of protection that we're going to be seeking from that perspective. It is not based off of affluence of a community. It is not based off of per square foot, per linear mile, per neighborhood, per structure. It is strictly based off of what is the plan that maximizes those total net benefits.
And these are wonderful questions. So we're going to continue through our presentation, but I want to also tell folks we have a full amount of time reserved for question and answers too. So keep thinking of them, and if they come up during the next portion of next segment of our presentation, we can go into more depth during our question and answer session as well. Thank you.
All right, so I appreciate those comments and questions, because it helps to set the foundation for this next piece. Because the next piece is, well, then what are you recommending, where, and why? So when we look at our tools, if these tools don't look familiar, I'd encourage you to take a look back at Climate Ready Boston, because I think it's a great toolkit that they started with, and I think it's a national and international level of tools that Climate Ready Boston is pulling from. May look different, may feel a little bit different, but generally speaking, they are taking very similar approaches to what the Corps of Engineers would recommend nationally, as well as the international community and the international resilience efforts that you see across the world. So the first one over here is this raised harbor walk or raised park space. Now, we have to understand that the Corps of Engineers has to be diligent with taxpayers' money. And so we have to identify what the federal interest is. And so raised harbor walk, well, you think, well, how would that be part of federal interest? The reality is if we construct a wall, and that wall is where a harbor walk is, there is a responsibility of the city to relocate that harbor walk. And so if you already have to relocate that harbor walk, wouldn't it make sense to just elevate that harbor walk as part of the project? And so now you have your flood control feature, but you still have your people and community connectedness to the water. And so there is absolutely a precedence and opportunity for that. And it also helps because the community is already familiar with it. Yes, in the future, it may look a little bit different, but it's still the same harbor walk that has connected the community and provided those alternate means of transportation rather than trying to jump on the T or get in your car and fight traffic. Raised park space, it's a little bit different, but I'm not going to tell you that there's no federal interest there. But maybe it's a matter of the city partnering with the Corps of Engineers on a feature, and then as part of that feature, increasing that grade raise. And a prime example of this is Langone Park. I was over there today, and it's amazing to me. I saw a bunch of kids out there. There would look to be some school field days going on, and kids loving it out there, having a great time playing on those baseball fields. What they don't realize is those elevated baseball fields serve as flood control to stop storm surge from coming in. So it could be as simple as that. Other examples is Pierce Park over in East Boston. Another example is Ryan Playground in Charlestown. And so could we do something like that in Pope John Paul Park? Could we do something like that in other areas throughout Tinian Beach? So that's just kind of an example. Raised berms and dunes. I will tell you that the Corps of Engineers, if you look throughout the Gulf Coast and Florida and even areas along the Atlantic, Mid-Atlantic, we're good at berms and dunes. And the problem is you have to have a source of sediment and sand. And so will we look at raised berms and dunes? Yes. But more likely what the berms and dunes that you're going to see in our recommendations are tied to buried flood walls. If you have a flood wall with a vertical surface and the water hits it, what happens when it reflects off? It increases that reflection because you don't have the natural process occurring. So maybe it makes sense to have your flood wall. But if you put a berm on top of that flood wall, it's less space. It takes less space than a levee would, but it allows for that natural process to still occur. It allows for some vegetation and natural tie-ins to allow for that softer, greener approach to a solution. Vertical flood walls. Just going to be honest with folks, and I hope you're not, thinking otherwise. That there are some places throughout the city of Boston where, due to space constraints or real estate constraints or utilities and infrastructure, there's going to be no choice where it's a vertical flood wall or it's a weak point in your system, and then you're just putting the rest of your system at risk. I want to jump down to the adapting buildings. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight, but really what I want you to understand is when we talk about non-structural solutions, we talk about adapting buildings and structures, there is no cookie cutter solution. There is no one size fits all, and there is no, I can tell you how we're going to do every structure in Dorchester, whether it's Port Norfolk or whether it's Savin Hill or whether it's areas along the Neponset. There is no one size fits all. But it is something that we would be irresponsible if we did not consider what would the long-term benefits of an adaptation be versus a 3-foot flood wall that stops a storm for the next 50 years. And so we're going to talk a little bit about different building adaptation techniques. We're also going to talk about a term, and I'm not sure if you folks have read the Boston Globe article, but I was quoted in there as talking about managed retreat. When we talk about managed retreat, we're not necessarily talking about we're going to buy your house and we're going to force you to move today. We're not talking about even in the next 10, 15 years. Managed retreat is a program and a process that we should be looking at 2140 today and saying we can defend in place to this point, but there comes a point where this area is going to live in a concrete prison in order to keep the water out, in order to get the water out from the interior, or it's going to be an island because we can no longer get our infrastructure and utilities there because of sea level change, groundwater table is increasing, and it's continuously saturated, whatever the case may be. So we will look and discuss managed retreat, but it's not a managed retreat over the next 10 years. Maybe in some situations it means that, but in a lot of the times when we talk about managed retreat, folks, I'm talking about 2100. I'm talking about 2120 and 2140. If we don't start planning for that today, we're doing a disservice to the future community. All right, next slide. So we talked a little bit about this. Here's some examples. Now, what I will tell you is these examples are not your examples. Some of these examples are for tropical events. Some of these examples are for undeveloped and previously undeveloped coastlines. So when we talk about the raised harbor walk, Norfolk, Virginia here. Virginia, Norfolk, that the risk there is tropical storms, and the risk is very real. They don't have a lot of the same interior protection that the harbor provides for you all. And so that's just one example. And one thing that you see in the back over there is a pump station. That's something that we have to consider. We're not going to drown a community from the inside. We're not going to induce risk to keep the water out of the community. It's not appropriate, and it's unethical, and it's just not how we operate. So if we're going to build something along the coastal edge, we have to understand and work with Boston Water Sewer Commission. How is it going to impact the interior drainage? How is it going to impact stormwater management? And so there may be some instances where we need to do pump stations in order to help assist evacuate the water so that we're not inducing risk from our projects. New Bedford, if you've been to Fox Point, New Bedford, there's other examples where, we have built very robust storm surge barriers, raised berms, and they perform very well. But am I telling you that the community of Dorchester is going to get a 15-foot solid rock berm that goes along that upons it, and you have to get used to it. No, I'm just sharing it as a tool in the toolkit. Next slide. Flood walls. Dorchester is not New Orleans. Dorchester is not the Missouri River. It's not the Mississippi River. You're not going to have 15-foot flood walls. But I will tell you, and many of you already know this, that if you walk along the coastal edge, there's significant changes in elevation, not necessarily visual to the naked eye, but in some areas you go from 8 feet NAVD 88 to 13, 14, 15 feet NAVD 88. And so if we're talking about having to have flood walls or barriers of any sorts in some areas, because we don't just base it off of stick up height in that above ground elevation, we have to base it off of water surface elevations. Water surface elevations are based off of NAVD 88 scale. And so there's going to be some areas where it appears to have a 5-foot stick up height or above ground level. And then there's going to be other areas where you can barely tell. Maybe it's 1 foot, 2 foot, maybe it's 3 foot, and it appears as though it's a new handrail for ADA compliance, when in fact it's actually a flood control feature. So when you see these barriers here in this Norfolk example, I don't want you to think that that's the wall we're considering putting up in Dorchester. I just want you to understand that visibly in some areas, that vertical surface, that vertical flood wall will be needed. Here's an example to your right, and maybe this example does apply to Savin Hill. Maybe this example does apply to some homes in Port Norfolk. Maybe this example is examples that homeowners are already taking on, where you take a structure on your right and you realize that it's built inside the floodplain, or you realize that the flood risk is real in today's world and you want to get it out of the floodplain, but you still want your home there. And so you can come in, fill in the basement. Maybe it requires you to fill in the basement. And then you can elevate the structure. You can do it to slab on grade. You can do it to foundations. There's many different tools in that non-structural toolkit. And this is just one example. And I've already shared, Spalding Rehabilitation Hospital in Charlestown, World Trade Center in South Boston. Those are two examples of where in the city of Boston, large commercial structures have gone through and done building adaptations. It means moving that electrical, fire suppression, mechanical, HVAC, getting that all up out of the floodplain and elevating that. So those are just some tools in the toolkit when it comes to non-structural. Next slide. All right. So the question is, how can you help today? The same way you've already been participating, ask those questions, share your concerns, help us understand what our flood picture looks like, what Climate Ready Boston put forward, what your issues with the Climate Ready Boston alternatives were, and what are we missing in our alignments. We're getting ready to go into this next phase of this discussion tonight, where we're going to show you what alignments we're looking at in different areas. We're going to look at what proposed tools we're looking at in those areas. You'll see a couple areas where it doesn't have anything on the map. And the reason we don't have anything on the map is because we're still trying to work through it, because there's a lot of complexities in some of these areas. So let's see, let's go to the next slide, and maybe we can pause here and see if there's any kind of comments or questions. Now, what I will say is there's 3 opportunities for you to provide comments, questions, feedback, if you don't want to come off mute or put anything in the chat tonight. So take a snapshot of this, download these slides afterwards, or scan the QR code and just start going to town and making comments. Or you can schedule a virtual appointment with us. We have virtual office hours. They're 15-minute blocks. If you need 2 blocks, schedule 2 blocks. If you need a first block and then a follow-on block, we've seen it all, we appreciate it all, and we want it all. Next slide. And I think this slide comes back up a couple more times. So
Oh, yeah. So if you didn't get your camera out or you need those links again, I promise that it will come back. Um, as Jeff mentioned, the next steps that we have for this stage of our study is to take in all of the answers that we're, what our job is to do for you is to give answers as best we can. What we cannot answer tonight, we absolutely will take back to our teams to be able to follow up with you and provide the answer using that Army Corps website page on our cityofboston.gov website. So it's a page on our city website. We will also be posting the presentation slides there. Thank you, Kelly, for putting those links in the chat. And we absolutely want to meet you either in person or over Teams, over a virtual format, to be able to talk through some of your concerns and questions. And our goal is to report back later this year. We're expecting around fall of 2025 to be able to share back with you what we heard and how we incorporated what changes we were able to make based on feedback that we heard. So those are our next steps to help report back to you. And with that, are we ready, Jeff, for the last? We're going to go through the neighborhood and then we're going to open up for widespread questions and concerns and discussion. So this is the last little bit. You're doing great, everybody.
yeah, let's jump in. All right. So as we travel from north to south here, there's some areas where it's going to feel like I'm going a little bit faster, and some areas, and some areas it's because we don't know what we don't know, and a lot of it's tied to what other folks are working on in other state or city agencies, and then in other areas we're going to spend a lot of time because I want to plant some seeds and I want to start some conversations that need to happen over the next couple of months. So what you're seeing here, the first two slides, is just a repeat of the fact that the Corps of Engineers is one piece of the resilience puzzle, but credit to the state of Massachusetts, DCR, Massport, MBTA, and the city of Boston. They're not resting on their laurels waiting for the Corps of Engineers to implement a project in 2040 that that can't address, it's too late to address a flood risk that's going to happen in 2030. So McConnell Park, Tinian Beach. And so as you look, there's 7 areas kind of highlighted in circles. These are the flood pathways, and those critical areas where we've identified we got to do something. And if we don't do something, we're not going to be able to create, construct, and implement a comprehensive system of features. We'll be putting band-aids and creating weak points along the coastline. Now, what does that look like from reducing probability versus reducing risk consequence in order to manage the risk? It's a little bit different across the neighborhood. So let's take a look. Let's jump in, starting Moakley Park. All right. So at the tail, the southern portion of Moakley Park, we know that the city and Boston Planning, they're working on Moakley Park, and we realize that there's FEMA brick grants in play. And so if you look at this alignment should line up pretty closely with what kind of the city's vision is. And it lines up with that, not just because it's the city's vision, but it's because it's the vision that makes sense. It's the vision that allows for the necessary elevation in the barrier, but it allows for enough space from what limited beach you have to try and allow for some natural processes in order to allow for reduced risk of exacerbating the erosion risk along that area. And so then we move down along this area, and then there's the Harbors Point community. I believe we have some folks from the Harbors Point community online tonight. And then it ties in up here at the JFK Library, which quickly grows or increases in elevation. So that's kind of the tie-in point. Now, what does this look like? It could look like many different things. It could look like a flood wall on the land side, not the water side. It could look like a flood wall on the water side, not the land side. If you do, there's an existing harbor walk there in case someone's not familiar with it. But if you do a landside flood wall, well, then you have to have openings along that flood wall to allow people access to the harbor walk, or you have to relocate the harbor walk. But at what cost are you going to do that? If you do a waterside type flood wall, concrete costs money. If you go out there and you look today, there is already a revetment of sorts where it's a rock type feature. So maybe in this area, it makes sense to just increase that revetment elevation in order to be able to stop that water from coming in, because inundation is the risk in this area. Maybe it makes sense to elevate the harbor walk. But if you elevate that harbor walk and you put a harbor walk on top of a feature, that means based off of your slope, you're going to have more of a space requirement. Does that now infringe upon somebody's private property? Does that now mean that somebody's going to lose access or lose a portion of their backyard? We don't know. But these are all things that we have to consider as we're recommending these features. So it might be an elevated harbor walk. It might be a wall. It might be a revetment. It might be, but what we can tell you is in order to reduce and manage the risk in this area, it's a matter of starting over here at Moakley Park and connecting all the way over here at the JFK Library. There's no half stepping and saying, well, we're going to stop the wall here or stop the wall here before we get to the Harbors Point community. We're just going to let the private properties, let them fend for themselves. That's not how risk management works. It has to be a comprehensive and complete solution. Next slide. All right, so now as we look at the Patton's Cove and the Savin Hill and then the Morrissey Boulevard, as we look at this area, we recognize that DCR, the city of Boston, there's a lot of people who have a vision for what Morrissey Boulevard looks like. What I want to say here tonight is we are open to all of those discussions and we are a part of all of those discussions and we appreciate being a part of all those discussions. However, right now, in what little limited authority we have and what our charge from Congress is on this study, we are looking at a some sort of barrier along the back of Patton's Cove. And then we recognize that it would have to come up and somehow cross Morrissey Boulevard. Does that mean elevating Morrissey Boulevard or does that mean a closure structure going across? We don't know, but we recognize that in order to have it as a complete solution, we're going to have to incorporate something through this Morrissey Boulevard area. And then on the other side, we recognize that we have to cut off that flood pathway. Now, what you don't see here is at the bottom of this screen, if you zoom in, you'll see there's a lot of blue on some houses in here. So this is one of those areas where it might make sense, rather than trying to take people's property from them and construct a flood wall or a barrier along this area, it might make sense in the near term and long term to just non-structurally adapt these homes. That might be through elevation or it might be through other ways. We're not saying we're buying out these homes and telling them to go find someplace else to live. What we're saying is in this area, it may make more sense for these limited number of structures to do a non-structural adaptation, which is cost shared. It comes with federal money. Don't think we're just putting the full burden on the homeowner or the city of Boston. No, it is still cost shared, but it might make more sense to do a building adaptation there rather than trying to build a wall and then have greater impacts environmentally as well as real estate. Next slide. All right, Morrissey Boulevard, the Castle Island, the bridge through here. I think everybody recognizes who's familiar with the area that, you know, in a lot of storms today, this becomes impassable already. There's a lot of discussions as what is the right future vision for this. And so we are open to all of those discussions. We're a part of all those discussions. However, right now, when we look at it from strictly a coastal storm risk perspective, We look at the fact that in a future without project condition, water comes through this Morrissey Boulevard under 93 here. And so we could address that through a closure structure at the end that closes this off, or we could address it through a flood wall through this little peninsula here. And so which one are we going with? We're not saying, but we do want to understand what are some of those environmental impacts? What are some of those transportation impacts? What is life like today when this road is impassable because of a storm? And so everybody has to take alternate means to get around this Malibu Beach, Dorchester area. Next slide. Tinian Beach. So with Tinian Beach, if we look strictly at today's alignment of the playground here, you have a harbor walk existing. Similar to discussions that I had along Harbor's Point, similar to discussions I've had with folks along Charlestown and even in downtown. If you have an existing harbor walk, that means you already have some rights of way and some public lands. And so wouldn't it make sense to just elevate that harbor walk to create a barrier to keep the water from coming in? Well, if there's a change, and there are some visions and plans out there to change the alignment of the harbor walk to set it further back and to kind of revision what this playground looks like, we are more than happy to have the discussions and look at the alignment of moving that alignment from the coastal edge here to further back closer to Conley Street. Why would we be in favor of that? Because that creates more green space and more natural process for water to do what water wants to do in front of it. And so we're more than happy to have those conversations and look at those alignments of taking this red line and bumping it back here closer to Conley Street and just kind of reimagining what that Tinian playground and that Tinian beach could look like. But then we also recognize with this Neponset Creek area, this little inlet here, there is a lack of high ground in this area. If you're familiar with the area, you already know this. So if you go to 14 feet or 16 feet, whatever your design elevation is, there's a significant change of 5 to 8 feet in this area that you would need to accomplish in order to kind of cut off this flood pathway. So what does that look like? And so when you look across Conley Street, there is an MBTA yard there. That MBTA yard has a tunnel that goes under I-93 there, and that is a flood pathway into the Dorchester community. What can we do to manage and cut that off? Some of it may tie into existing noise abatement walls and taking some, fences and turning them into flood walls in order to cut that flood pathway off. But we do recognize that there's an alignment here. Next slide. Okay, Port Norfolk. What I want folks to recognize here is we have no lines on the map. Does that mean that we're ignoring Port Norfolk or not thinking about Port Norfolk? No. I want you to understand that the complexities in this Port Norfolk area is such that we have not settled on a specific defense strategy. We recognize that with our Tinian Beach alignment, we come up and we tie in to Franklin Street over here on the other side of the Neponset Creek at the head. We recognize that there's stormwater outfalls there with Boston Water Sewer Commission. We recognize that there are roads that go down and around the community. And so logic might tell you, well, let's just elevate the road. You could elevate the road, but if you're going to elevate a road that has traffic on it, depending as to how many lanes you need a certain crest elevation, that top elevation. And you need it to be so structurally designed so that not only can it stop the water, but it can absorb all the traffic on top of it, whether it's significant levels of traffic or whether it's light traffic, right? And so in order to do that, you also have to have a slope coming down off of it. So if you elevate those roads, what does it do for those homes right there along the road's edge? how much of their property are you going to have to infringe upon? Will it be a full parcel taking because now you've got such a slope that they can't even get in and out of their driveways? Well, maybe we'll just elevate the homes in there. Well, what if some of them aren't really able to be elevated because of their design type or their construction type? Maybe some of them are already elevated to a certain degree and just need a little bit of additional. So there is a lot of complexity in this Port Norfolk area that just saying one solution today is going to solve that problem. But what we would like to know is if we were to look at doing non-structural adaptation in this area, has anyone in the community already started investing in that? If so, what are some of the challenges and observations that you've identified with that? Is there anyone who's already having, concerns with FEMA saying, hey, I've been told in order to maintain my flood insurance, I have to build or rebuild outside of the floodplain? And then there's some areas in here where, maybe there is space that we're missing where you could construct something structurally. Maybe it's a matter of taking this Joe Finnegan Park and elevating that park or putting some sort of backstop along this area. But then maybe there's HTRW, hazardous toxic radioactive waste, and CERCLA in that area because it used to be a paper mill. We don't know. We'd like to get your input and feedback on that, though. So this is a very complex area. We recognize that and we appreciate that. And that's one of those reasons why we don't want to just assert ourselves and say, this is the solution for Port Norfolk. We want your feedback and we want you to be a part of the process. Next slide. I busted time, so I apologize. But there's a lot more areas here in Dorchester to talk about. This is the last slide, though, I think. Let's talk about the Neponset River and the Davenport Creek. So let's start with Davenport Creek down here, Boston Water Sewer Commission. If this looks familiar, this alignment or this little line here, that's because Boston Water Sewer Commission is already working on a study and already working on a project in that area. And we think we agree with their solution, whether it's part of the federal project or whether Boston Water Sewer Commission is moving out on it independently of the Corps of Engineers. We think it's a great approach. And so that's kind of what we're thinking as well. Along here, now, we recognize Pope John Paul Park. This area here is green space. There's limited green space in Dorchester. And there's an opportunity here for soccer fields. There's an opportunity here for recreation. What I would tell you is whether we go coastal edge like this or whether we set back closer to behind the park, the idea is to maintain this green space and to not take away from the functionality and the recreation opportunities within this green space. But we do recognize there are some key flood pathways between this rail bridge, the commuter rail, and this Neponset Street Bridge that goes across. We recognize that there is a flood pathway that comes through here and it goes under I-93 and it goes all the way back here into the Dorchester community. And so we recognize the risk and we recognize that we have to address that risk. And most likely it's some sort of structural solution. Now, this is an opportunity here where maybe it's taking a softer, greener solution where you change the grade of the park, you elevate, or you put a backstop further back to allow the park to get wet. Because 9 times out of 10, if there's a nor'easter coming in, kids aren't out here playing soccer. The reality is you're not going to, unless you're like me as a teenager, I was out playing in it. But the reality is if it floods, it's okay. So do you put the backstop or do you take a coastal edge solution and just elevate the harbor walk through here? We haven't determined that, but we'd love to have your input into that discussion. All right, next slide. Long-term projects to address long-term risk. We're looking at 50 to 100 years. We're asking you to consider beyond 100 years. But the city of Boston is already working on those near-term flood pathways. Those will be integrated into our project, not torn up and thrown out the window and redone when our project is ready to be constructed. We're asking you to help us understand from a community perspective, when this system is not active and doing what it's supposed to be doing to protect the community, it needs to become a part of that community's identity and characteristics into perpetuity. So how can we get your feedback to make you a part of that process, understanding that we're not going to make everybody happy? If we can all agree on what the risk and the hazard is, we can all agree on the approaches, and then we can at least accept the difference of opinions, but accept the plan that is constructible and implementable and affordable for people to maintain. All right, I went over, but I think we still have some time for either feedback in this venue or feedback online.
We absolutely do have time. So the floor, the just to boost these one last couple more times, we have virtual office hours. These are going to be open every Friday. You're more than welcome to just give a heads up, make a virtual appointment with us. We have our study feedback form in the center. And then again, that QR code on the end is linking back to that first one to be able to make an appointment to follow up with us. Or if you have a community meeting that you'd like us to attend, I will be here from the City of Boston to be able to help meet you at your community meeting, neighborhood meeting, block parties this summer. Invite me. I promise I'll be fun. We can talk risk and have barbecue. With that, I'm going to answer questions when hands are in the order that hands are raised. So if you do have a question, you can either type it in the chat, I will keep an eye out, or you can raise your hand and we'll go from there. And I see our first hand is Maria, so you can go ahead. I'm going to ask you to come off mute. Oh, try one more time. Sorry about that.
Went back on. Hello?
There you go. Yep,
Okay.
now we can hear you. Thank you.
I'm Maria Lyons, and I'm a resident of Port Norfolk area, unfortunately. Well, it's a great area, but we're in the blue there a lot. But anyway, I'm at the Port Norfolk Civic Association meeting now with a few other members. We're all listening to this presentation. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I am concerned, as well as the other people in the neighborhood, about the Climate Ready Boston plan and the Army Corps of Engineer plan for Tinian Beach. I do think maybe there's a compromise of halfway between the two, which might end up be better than either one. For instance, raising the harbor walk, and then instead of going all the way to the end, cutting over after the tennis courts, so that you still have a large natural area, but you don't destroy some of the trees and groves that the Climate Ready Boston area was planning. But that's something that we could look at in more particular. The other concern I have about that area is that if you do the Climate Ready or the Army Corps of Engineer plan on Tinian and not do anything on the other side, we believe it's going to cause more flooding into the Port Norfolk residential area. We know where the pathways are. We'd love to show you where all the water comes in. And something has to be done with the other side of Tinian Creek, or the water is just going to flow into our neighborhood as it already does. The first street there is Lawley Street, and there was a few feet of water in the big storms of 2018. The water also comes in the end of the peninsula, where there's now a rundown area that is supposedly going to be done something with, but we don't know what. And then through the Venezia parking lot into the estuary area. And the water comes down the street, Walnut Street as well. So I think, you can't just do what I'm saying is that you can't do the Tinian Beach project without doing something on the other side, or you're going to make it worse. And we'd love to meet with you and show you where all the pathways are. Most of them are on private land, which might make it more difficult, but something has to be done, or because their properties get flooded first. So I would think that they would be cooperative. The other thing I wanted to say was I'm also a board member of the Neponset River Watershed Association called NEPRA, which hopefully you're familiar with. And we right now have a commission studying the estuary, hopefully to try to come up with ways to save the estuary along the Neponset River as sea level rises. And we have engineers working on it. We have people at NEPRA working on it. We have the Woods Hole group working on it and neighbors working on it. And they're coming up with some really good ideas of how to actually try to increase the marsh instead of just letting it go away. So I'd love to contact you with, set up a contact between the Army Corps of Engineers in the city with the NEPRA estuary group, because you didn't really talk too much about the nature-based designs, but according to the study that they're doing, by increasing the estuary, you can actually prevent the flooding behind it. So, and they're, trying to, pick out areas where that can be done. Some of it would just be adding height to the land so that the estuary can remain and not be flooded out. Some of it would be taking over parking areas from businesses and whatnot that they built over the marsh in the first place, because we all know that's where the water goes, where the water was 100 years ago. And some of it is also about not developing areas along the coast anymore. So I'd love to set up a connection between the head of that group that's studying it, and so that you can see the work that they're doing. So thank you very much.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
Maria.
much,
Hey,
Maria.
hey,
Can
can
I
we go
summarize?
to can we go to the Port Norfolk slide while you summarize, if you want to summarize?
I
I'm
sure
a visual
can.
person.
And I just want to make sure I got the talking points right, Maria, so bear with me while I scroll here. Um, Thank you so much for your thoughts and questions here. So just to make sure I have the three questions, the first one was comment around the Tinian Beach alignment and improvements and suggestions on the latest DCR and Climate Ready Boston design advance. The second one I have is around impacts for flooding in Port Norfolk as part of Army Corps design and any modifications of Tinian Beach design, looking at some of those concerns. And the third item I have is, are we connecting with the Neponset River Watershed Association and facilitating that connection to help make sure we're on the same page with the organization's resilience plan? Did I miss anything?
No, they do. Yeah, you might just add, they're working on trying to protect the estuary as well
Thank you.
as
Yes.
flooding and stormwater, but they're concerned about, it is an area of critical environmental concern, and there aren't very many estuaries left around the city of Boston, just in East Boston and in Neponset. So we need to save it as sea level rises. And it's important to save the houses and the railroads and all of that. We understand that, but it also is important to save the important biological benefits that we have from the estuary, as well as the
No,
flooding.
yeah, and I
Absolutely.
couldn't agree more. And let me start by taking a jump at your first kind of point/question, and that is, thank you for the feedback about, maybe there's a compromise between the Tinian Beach, the playground revisualization, vitalization, and the harbor walk, and maybe you cut it in a different area to allow for that natural process of the water to go. I think a lot of that's going to depend on what target elevation do we determine we need to reach. And I think part of that's going to depend on what does future adaptation look like. Do we take a softer approach and shoot for a target elevation of 14 feet, which we know between now and 2050 would be effective? Or do we need to go to 16 feet, in which case that would address that longer term solution? Maybe it's 2090 or even a little bit longer. And so I think what you bring up is a very good question, and it becomes a question of what are we trying to target for our elevation, because that's going to have a lot of impact on what features and where do we need to tie into. So I appreciate that comment. The next comment that you made is a valid, viable, and it's something that by our policy we're required to take a look at. And what we refer to it as is levee superiority. And so I wish I could draw on this, but if we build something along or elevate along the Tinian Beach side of Neponset Creek, when storm surge comes in, is it just going to see that we built a wall there and decide, oh, well, we better go back out into the harbor? Or is it going to reflect off of that or bounce off of that? Or is it going to redirect itself? And where's the only place it could redirect redirect itself. Well, if it's going to redirect itself, it's going to redirect itself at the Port Norfolk community. And so that is something that we absolutely have to model in our future with project condition, because if we are inducing risk, it's something that we have to manage for and mitigate for. And so I just want you all to have the confidence in understanding that what you're saying is not just hyperbole, and it's not just speaking out of fear to get us to stop doing something. It's something that we have to, by policy, account for in our future with project modeling, and we'll be able to demonstrate that, what those impacts are and how we're managing or mitigating for that in our recommended plan. So I do want you to have a little bit of confidence, understanding that if we do recommend something there, it's because we have a high level of confidence of what those second and third order impacts on that Port Norfolk community are. But then if we do have to do something in Port Norfolk, then it's a separate conversation of, well, then what does that look like? Does it look like elevating a road and infringing upon people's property? Because as you mentioned, a lot of that property that gets flooded today is private property. So are people willing to give up easements, or willing to give up into perpetuity portions of their property in order to elevate a road through there? Or do we need to put a wall through there? If we put a wall through there, at what cost do we have to construct that wall? Well, if this is the cost, does it make sense then to elevate to a certain point and then do non-structural adaptation throughout some of the other areas of the community? So those are all questions and comments that we're going to have to address, and discussions that we're going to have with you, Maria, and your community association. And so I would just ask you all to let us know when's a good time to sit down with you all and specifically kind of talk about, from our perspective, what are some of the things that we could look at doing in that area, so that we could understand from a community's perspective what preferences you all have. So that's a long-winded answer to say those are great questions and great comments. And as far as the estuary goes, I'll let you know Joe Christo is on this line. Joe, I'm going to name drop you here, not only because you're exciting to work with, but because you're a critical partner on this. Joe Christo co-directs with Katie, and I forget her last name, I'm sorry, Katie, the Stone Living Labs. And something that we've been working with them specifically on is nature-based solutions and taking softer, greener, adaptable approaches in order to preserve that. Because like I said, I'm a fan of Aldo Leopold. And if you neglect and say we don't care about the biophysical community, in 25, 50 years, when you have all of the invasive species and the mosquitoes and the smells and the ruined community connectedness because you've neglected your biophysical community, you're going to look back and go, man, hindsight's 2020. So let's not neglect it and look back upon it. Let's consider it in our planning today. And we're charged in our policy to consider that. So I appreciate all of your comments.
Thank you. I really want to thank you for recognizing that the water will go somewhere in the Pine Neck Creek, because up to this point, I mean, the Climate Ready Boston plan, it looks lovely, it looks beautiful, but we've been mentioning this to them time and time again. And the Woods Hole Group engineers and the Climate Ready people who work really hard kept telling us, no, it won't, it'll just go back out into the ocean. And, you know I only had Oceanography 101 in college, but, the water has to go somewhere. When it hits at an angle, it goes at an angle. And, so I kept refuting that, saying, no, it's going to go into the port. No. So for you to say it is very reassuring to us. So thank you very much.
And I do want to be clear. What I said is we're going to model it and show you what those results are. So maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I'm going to let the modeling and the engineering speak for itself. But it's something that we absolutely have to consider and account for.
Okay, thank you. The other thing I wanted to ask, one more, I'm sorry, I'm taking up so much time. Are you, what's your? Oh, are you working on the Quincy side of the river as well as the Boston side?
So I am quasi working on the Quincy side. What I mean by that is my partner, Barbara Blumeris, she's a colleague of mine with the New England District, and she's working with the state of Massachusetts EEA. And and they're doing a metropolitan watershed study, a much larger. So it includes Boston, but includes all 18 of the coastal communities. And so from that perspective, we are looking at the Quincy side, and we have to look at what our plan on the Neponset, how does that impact the Quincy side? So from that perspective, yes, we are considering the Quincy side, but we're not looking at it from a how can we manage the risk on the Quincy side.
Okay, thank you. There might be someone else in this group who wants a question. So if I raise my hand again, it's not me, it's somebody else.
Okay.
Thank
you,
you.
Maria.
Do you have a question, Ed?
I do.
Oh,
Ed Rocher, I'm 52-year-old resident of, not 52, but been here for over 50 years. And I'm an architect, and I've been working on Luther Briggs's, one of his masterpieces from about 1820 on Walnut Street. And I've been reviewing uh, the one of our current development projects that's on the table right now. And I was struggling with this for about 2, 3 days, and then finally, I just said, "Well, wait a minute. You know, this person, their architect, for the developer, had some good ideas, but they seem to be um, towing the line on a lot of different items." And I said that, you know, it was just so frustrating to try to understand where they were going with the design plan and how it would affect the quality of life in terms of um, the milieu of the port. And um, and I said, I think we have to figure out a way in terms of analyzing these projects about what is the best treatment for it, projects impact on the port, and how can we, without jeopardizing or compromising the overall quality of the this natural environment, which is uh, I, it was something I felt I had to do in order to make any sense out of this. So I had an idea that if somehow or other, you know, we could, you know, come to the agreement that, you know, whoever is developing here is not necessarily assuming that they have no underlying agenda that would ruin the quality of life in the port, but would have some freedom to enjoy the natural opportunities or possibilities that might exist, but people are so concerned about dotting the i's and crossing the t's that along the way that creativity gets lost. And
So just to
I,
make sure I'm on the same page, it's Ed. Did you repeat
Ed
your name
Roach.
again?
Ed Roach, yeah, I'm an
Ed
architect.
Roach, thank you.
Yeah,
Um, just to make sure I'm following along, Ed, is your question around how I think I heard two, so I want to make sure I'm on the same page as you. I heard one question relating to kind of how uh, development, the development applications in Port Norfolk for looking at redevelopment in Port Norfolk, how the waterfront permitting capacity takes into account quality of life and other concerns relating to waterfront development. And the second maybe being how this project is taking into account neighborhood quality of life as part of the whole alternative assessment viewpoint. Am I on the same page? Am I getting warmer?
absolutely. Yeah,
Beautiful. I can absolutely take on the first question, speaking from the city, and then I think we can kind of share a little bit with Jeff to kind of talk about the latter part about this project in particular and quality of life. Um, Speaking directly to either applications that have come in the past, or I'm going to speak generally for areas that fall under our coastal
Yep.
flood risk overlay district,
Yep.
as well as our existing zoning rules and regulations for when we have those large developments or high capacity operations. These all fall under our planning department umbrella for the applications they receive. And
Yep.
something that we already have existing for Boston is the areas that we have our coastal flood concerns are required to consider resiliency for the Climate Ready Boston flood pathways as part of their design, and it needs to be included in designs. And we can share links in the chat for the details on kind of what those plans entail. And then to kind of turn that process and how those developments are related to the work we're talking about with the Army Corps project, it's looking at, as Jeff had said earlier, and as Chris mentioned at the top of our presentation too, we have the opportunity as part of these long-term projects to also bring into the fold all of the projects that we have happening now.
Yep.
So this isn't necessarily an answer specific to maybe who you had in mind in Port Norfolk specifically, but I'm speaking more generally to where we have private developers that have plans in process or applications in process along the waterfront proper. We are working with those teams to come up with the best approach for how those pieces will interconnect, whether a developer is building now or if we're adapting our regulations in the future to ensure that anything that is built in the future is compatible and connect with our Army Corps alignments.
And if I might, and what was your name?
So I am Kate Rosa. I am the Senior Climate Resilience Project Manager working in our Office of Climate Resilience for the City of Boston. So I'm a City of Boston point of contact when you reach out using those feedback forms.
Mhm.
I'll be the person who's helping to connect you to all of the great team that I have here in the city and the Army Corps. So I'm going to pass the second question because it sounded like I heard it right over to you, Jeff, which is quality of life and community impacts. How are we helping to incorporate that into our comprehensive benefit strategy?
And
Right.
just one,
Oh, was there something else?
and quite honestly, I was struggling with kind of trying to stay within the guidelines of where we've been and where but I got to thinking about where do we want it to go, and um, Graham Gunt, one of my favorite architects in the world, just passed away. He was 85, and I worked with him on a number of projects up in Lowell, and there was the freedom of and the people in Port Norfolk, in my opinion, have done a marvelous job of holding on to what we got, with reinforcing for the most part the existing fabric and quite well.
This isn't the design people.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I want to touch on something, Ed.
is this Chris?
Nope, this is Jeff.
Oh, hi, Jeff. Hey.
Yeah. Hey, Ed, I want to touch on something, and that is you talk about quality of life, and you talk about we have to understand that resilience in the community takes different forms for different people, and quality of life means different things to different people, and it's something that it makes the diversity of the city of Boston, diversity within Dorchester, and the other communities, such a part of the fabric of the community and the culture and the history of the area that I love. I grew up in Maine. And so Southern Maine is nothing like the history of Boston. But I will tell you that the people in the community and the fabric of that community, and we see across the nation gentrification, and we see historically redlining, and we see all of these things. And so it's important for us to look at the past in order to plan for the future. And so from the Corps of Engineers perspective, I will tell you that we have limited scope. We have limited scope, and we have been charged with Congress to focus on coastal storm risk. But in focusing on coastal storm risk, do not forget about the socioeconomic impacts. Do not forget about the culture and the history. It's not just about complying with Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act. It's about look at the rich cultural history within that community within Boston. It means look at the historical nature of the structures in that Boston. It means looking at the biophysical community and the environmental impacts of our natural resources, and then say, this is our recommendation. But beyond that, you have a very active partner. We have a very active partner. You have a very active government within the city of Boston who recognizes exactly what you're talking about. Maybe you may not feel it all the time, but I will tell you, doing projects across the nation, you have a city government who is not just focused on that tangible monetary return on investment. They're focused on the holistic resilience piece and of the pie and that puzzle. And so I would say, to your point, keep staying active in the process. Understand that within our sphere of influence, we may be limited, but you have an advocate within the Mayor Wu administration, as well as Chris Osgood in the Environment Department and Brian Sweat at the Office of Climate Resilience. I would say that the community is very lucky to have the advocates that you do have. And part of that is based off of you all staying active in the conversation. So I'll just kind of leave it there, understanding that there may be some other people, but I'd love to just keep talking with you, because I think you're spot on with, it's not just about building something to stop the water. It's about maintaining quality of life into perpetuity.
Oh, yeah. And we're so lucky and so blessed. And I think we're moving in the right direction. It's hard to say given the situation around many places in our country and the world, but this is a very this is really wonderful. And when sometimes you're challenged with tough problems and tough questions to answer, you maybe lighten up a little bit, smell the roses, and what can you do to make it a better place? But thank you very much
Thank
for
you, Ed.
the presentation. I loved it.
I saw Chris Osgood came on camera. I want to give him a chance to speak, but I want to recognize that Philip put a great question in, and that's tied directly to this kind of comment that I just mentioned. He asked, is the Trump administration affecting your budget now and future expectations? It's a valid question, but what I need folks to hear is that on a bipartisan level, historically, the Corps of Engineers has invested in coastal storm risk, flood risk management, and these types of infrastructure projects historically on a bipartisan level. Evidence of that is that this year, in this year's continuing resolution, this study for the coastal storm risk management study in the city of Boston has been fully funded on the federal side. Where we are typically incrementally funded on a yearly basis, Congress and the continuing resolution under this administration has said, no, you said you need this much money. Here's the money. Get this study done so that we can get the infrastructure and the project constructed and implemented in order to manage the risk. So if I can't tell you what the implementation funding stream is going to look like, but I will tell you that on a bipartisan level, this administration and past administrations have continued to see these projects as absolutely vital to community resilience. And Chris, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. This was just a set of very quick follow-ups to Maria and Ed. Ed, if it is useful, please feel free to reach out. Happy to coordinate a conversation. Maria, two other quick follow-ups just to underscore one thing, which both Kate and Jeff said. It's useful for us to do a site walk. We're very happy to do a site walk and have that conversation. And then second, Kate, you already might have mentioned this. We have reached out to the Hudson River Watershed Association to tie in the really great work which they're leading along the estuary with this. And so there will be some follow-up conversations there, and happy, Maria, to involve you in those as well as Ian and Carrie and the team. So, but just want to cover those quick points. I'll turn it back over to Kate and to Jeff.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Jeff. All right, folks, so I'm not seeing other hands, and I think that we've addressed all of the questions in the chat. And I very much appreciate it seems like we might have a little bit of a TED Talk to watch. Thank you, Philip, in the chat. If anyone's interested in the flood research TED Talk that Philip boosted in the chat. But otherwise, last call for any hands to raise to come off mute. What I'm going to do is just skip one slide. Please, 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 if you prefer written form, use that center column to use our study feedback form. This you can fill out and it will link directly to me. I will follow up with you this week. If you'd like to have a one-on-one, a small group, virtual office hours, we will be hosting them Fridays throughout the summer. The next one that's available is this coming Friday between 10 a.m. and 12 noon. And the QR code on the far right unlocks that link if you'd like to make an RSVP to an office hour with us. We'll set up a virtual link and we can interact and hear more about your concerns.
Or come say hi to me tomorrow at the mayor's coffee chat.
Exactly. We'll be inside at the rain location tomorrow. So if you follow the website that Kelly, thank you for putting in the chat, listed, we will be there. Hearing no more questions, I'm gonna go ahead and send us home just to keep us timely here. I don't want to take up any more of your evening, folks. So with that, Jeff, a closing remark for us?
Yeah, I just want, again, when I grew up and took civics class in high school, I was told to do your civics duty, and that meant go out and vote. But I've learned over the years that it means much more than that. It means participating in these conversations. It means influencing, because not only are you influencing for your community today, but you're influencing for your future generations and for the community tomorrow. And so thank you all for taking that time. Again, on behalf of the USACE leadership and the my team, we have about 15 to 20 people working on this project. Thank you. And again, this is the start of the conversation. It needs to continue. And we need to understand that there's going to be some tough conversations, but by building these relationships today, it'll make those tough conversations more genuine in the future. So thank you. And I look forward to engaging with you all again over the next couple of years.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Take care. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.